it's on the state. You can look up in the.
Right, or what's his name?
You were live.
Yeah, yeah.
Gio.
You're live.
Yeah, we are live. Welcome, folks. This is Joint Justice Oversight Committee. It is December 15th, and it is our last meeting before the General Assembly comes back the first week in January. So we're going to be doing a lot of updates and final discussions on some of the items. And some items are brand new that we haven't really talked about, particularly PRIN. We're going to be talking about that, Prisoner Research Innovative Study. And we have a lot of members of our committee on Zoom. We have 5 folks who are members of our committee who are Zooming in. So I just want to remind folks who are there on Zoom that if there are documents that are put up on the screen and you have questions or statements you want to make and you raise your hand, we will not be able to see that. Megan will see it, and then she will notify me that you have your hand up. So there'll be a delay there. Apologize for that. We're going to start with Isaac from DOC, just to give us some brief updates in terms of what's been occurring in corrections over the last month. And I know some folks have had a lot of concern about the increase in detainee population and what's driving that. And I don't know, Isaac, if you also want to touch a little bit on the discussions that have occurred with that, with the Crime Research Center, as well as with Representative Lalonde and myself. So Isaac.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Isaac Nando, I'm the Policy Director at the Department of Corrections. I should note as well, this is my last few weeks at the department. I'll be transitioning, but I just want to thank the committee for their time this morning. It's been a real pleasure the last few years. Did want to address a few items the chair mentioned in regards to detainees. We did have a meeting last week with Crime Research Group to talk about bail data. So I think there will be movement on that in the coming session. I know, Chair Lalonde, you've been very interested in that topic. I'm hoping that we'll have more to show on that in the next few weeks as we move forward with an MOU, looking at combining different streams of bail data from the judiciary, from DOC with CRG on that.
So Isaac, if I can interrupt you there, because Martin has really been trying to have some of that discussion before us as Joint Justice Committee. But the data needs a little bit more clarification, a little bit more work. And it was decided that the real work needs to occur in our standing committees come this session, because there needs to be more time for the Crime Research Group to assimilate the data, also to work with the courts and to work with DOC to get more information.
Right. And everyone has a little piece of the puzzle, but I think the Crime Research Group is really well positioned to put those pieces together. I did also want to note, Chair, that I'm actually set to testify on behalf of the department for our opioid settlement funds at 10:40. So I will need to wrap that up by then, but I think we should be fine.
It should be fine.
But I really did, want to look at the detained population in particular, and you've seen these slides before, but just again, noting the increase in state detainees over the last 4 years. This is for our men's population. And then 53% increase, and then looking at the population at CRCF, our women's facility in South Burlington, with that over 100% increase over the last few years in state detainees. And I think the committee is aware of this, and I hope the standing committees take some time during the session to really investigate this further and some of the multivariate factors that might be leading to the increase in detainees, but certainly it is having a strain on the system. And I think that is very clear. We'll go to the next slide here. When we look at the conditions right now at CRCF. So this is a photo just taken a few days ago. This is temporary housing inside CRCF in the gym space. There are 24 women right now sleeping on the floor in plastic beds. it is a very difficult situation. We had a group of lawmakers from the chair's committee a few days ago do a tour, and I think they were really taken aback by what they saw. It's a really difficult situation as well for our contractors, our partners, including Lund, which runs the Kids Apart program out of CRCF. Due to the folks who are living in the gym right now, they're unable to operate the Kids Apart parenting program in its kind of traditional model because the bathroom space is being used by the folks in custody. So they can't accommodate child visits in the same way they usually do. And I think, it's a really difficult situation for the folks in custody. It's difficult on the staff. I think clearly the increase in our population is straining the limits of our system. And I think you see that here.
So are you seeing that same kind of pressure in our men's facilities as well? And I'm assuming some of the folks into sleep beds in the male facilities.
Yes, there are men as well sleeping on what we call sled beds, which are these plastic beds that kind of resemble sleighs when you turn them upside down. You can see them a bit in this picture. And there are men who are sleeping on the floor as well. Again, we're at 130% capacity for CRCF. We have 177 women as of today in that facility. Ideally, that facility was really built to accommodate 88 women. So that's where we are with that facility. And then the men's facilities are at over 150% capacity. So we are seeing the real limits of our infrastructure as a state.
And it's a detainee population that's really pushing those numbers.
As you saw in those previous slides, that's been where the increase has been in our population. And those are folks that we really cannot move out of state because they have court appearances and they could also be released at any point. So it's really not appropriate to send them out of state.
So here at the Chittenden facility, there's a picture that you've shown us. Who would be staying in those beds? Would it be sentence folks or would it be detainees or a mixture?
I think it's a mix of folks. I'd have to talk to the facility and see exactly who that they're accommodating in those beds.
Questions from members? And again, though, you folks who are zooming in, I can't see, so I'm going to depend on Megan. Give me a heads up. Mark?
Could you just comment on the ICE detainees or federal detainees and what's being done with that, in both men's and women's detainees?
Yeah, absolutely. So as of today, there are 5 women who are held for immigration authorities at CRCF. So I want to caution that that's not really what's driving the increase. I think it's very much the state detainees. But recently, because of these overcrowding issues, the commissioner did authorize the department to refuse taking more folks from Immigrations and Customs Enforcement when the population at CRCF surpasses 170 folks. So that's a new policy that we've put into place to try and create, I think, some stability at the facility.
So do you have the number of detainees as of today? Do you have that number here?
Yeah, I think Haley can pull that up. But we have, again, a mix of, there's kind of 3 different detainee populations. So there are federal detainees, so folks who are held by the U.S. Marshals Service, who are facing federal criminal trial in U.S. District Court. There are state detainees, and then we have a few folks who are being held for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah, there are 543 total state detainees today. 471 are male, and 72 are female. And then there are 72 male federal detainees, and that's U.S. Marshals. There are 16 held for ICE, and then 16 female federal detainees, and those are U.S. Marshals, and 5 held for ICE.
So the 72 federal is part of that ICE, or is it just the federal marshals with?
I believe it's just federal marshals.
How many beds do we contract with federal marshals for federal crimes that are committed in Vermont?
I think we contract 80 beds
80
for
beds.
U.S. Marshals among both men and women's facilities.
So we're seeing what's happening with the Chittenden facility. What's going to happen with our men who are incarcerated and sentenced in terms of the increased pressure that's being put on our facilities? Are more of them going to start being shipped out to Mississippi? I hate to put you on the hot spot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Chair. And I think, there are probably several factors to consider there that would obviously, I'm looking at Representative Squirrel, that would create budget pressure for the departments. That's something we'd have to consider. I think we'd have to look at some of our contracts and agreements with Core Civic in Tallahatchie. I can say right now, we're not contemplating another transfer. I know there were about 28, 30 folks who were sent out of state relatively recently. I think, and we've said this publicly, unfortunately, the folks who are, most perhaps well suited, if you could use that phrase, to being transported out of state are also those folks who are most likely to be engaged in programming, or most likely to be pillars of the correctional facility community, in the sense that they are not detainees, they're sentenced folks. They're usually more stable, and medically speaking. And those folks are the department, in terms of its classification and how it decides to send people out of state. Oftentimes those people are kind of at the top of the list. And so that's a real tension that we're trying to work through as a department.
And how many beds have we contracted for right now within our FY27 budget? Is it about 150?
Currently we have 153 individuals, I believe, who are in Tallahatchie, and I'm not sure I can't remember exactly what our contracted number is.
Amount is around 300.
Yeah.
Right.
The budgeted number.
That is budgeted in our FY27 budget.
Yeah, I know we have some budget testimony coming up, so we could confirm with our finance.
So Alice, can I ask a question? I'm going to take us away. I'm going back to the Women's Correctional Facility, if I could.
Yeah, it's all yours, Jenny.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, it really is concerning to me that after so many years, we're looking at this, and it's upsetting. I have a couple questions. One, how are the women getting exercise, and has the exercise room been taken away in Northwest or other facilities across the state for men? That's one. How are they getting the activity that they need to improve their outlook? And then I know that you probably can't give the final answer on this one, but we keep asking about the women's facility, a new women's facility, and I'm thinking of, Alice, your committee, and also of Senator Harrison's committee, and the effort that could be put into ensuring that a new facility is on the books and happening as quickly as possible. So the question is about exercise, but the comment is about moving with alacrity on a new facility.
Yeah, I can take those. Thank you, Chair Lyons. I think to the first question, there is a separate weight room that's to the back of the person who's taking this photo that you walk through to get to the gym space. That remains open, but certainly this has reduced the recreational opportunities of women who are incarcerated in Vermont today. So, for example, we've heard from a volunteer who leads pickleball. Obviously, that's not able to move forward at this time, given that there are folks in that space. And we use the gym space for all kinds of recreational activities. That's just not possible right now. And I think that it really paints a picture of the struggle with the department trying to reach its statutory obligations. The first opening lines of Title 28 are that the department's mission is to provide rehabilitative services, and without the infrastructure to do it, I think we're really coming up against the limits, as a department, what we can provide. To the second question, Chair, I think we are at a crisis moment when we have women sleeping on the floor, both in the gym and throughout the facility, in a building that was built decades and decades ago that is falling apart, that has sewage coming up, flooding the space. I think that most folks in our communities would tour this building and say that it does not live up to Vermont values, that it does not live up to our expectations. I think the women who live there, the folks from the community who provide services there, our staff, deserve a space that is safe, dignified, and humane. And as a state, we are not doing that at this moment. So I think it is imperative that we find a new path forward. I think it was unfortunate to see some communities, and this is certainly not unique to DOC. I think it exists across the Agency of Human Services, communities across our state that have been, I think, less than enthusiastic to welcome an AHS facility into their backyards. I can understand there will be questions about that, and it's a complex negotiation process, what that might look like. But at some point, we do need to fill these critical gaps in our social services. I think this is one of them. And so as it regards a new facility, I think we'll be going back and looking at communities that might be willing to step up, that might be willing to work with the state to find a solution here.
Put it simply, in order to move away from the current facility and build a new one, you need land. Can't do anything without land. You gotta have a parcel that you can build on.
Right. And just to that point, Sharon, I think we were looking at several parcels of state-owned property. We'll continue to work with our partners at BGS to evaluate what might be available. I will say, I think, there are some limits to some of those sites that we've looked at. I think some of the Essex sites had also very high development costs when it came to sewer, municipal connections, things of that nature. I won't get too far down that road, but I think we'll have to be creative when it comes to finding land that might be appropriate. And particularly keeping it in the Chittenden County area. We want to make sure our providers at, the network, Mercy Connections, at Kids Apart, our staff can still, make it to this facility. I think if we put it somewhere outside of Chittenden County, we're going to run up into other critical issues about staffing that facility, about making sure it has the correct services for women who are incarcerated there. So it's a difficult, it's difficult to find that exact site.
We've been looking to replace the Chittenden facility, and it'd be regardless if it was a female facility or a male facility. We've been looking to replace this since about 2018. We're right in the same spot we were 7 years ago. Teresa. Okay, Teresa first and then Wendy.
So I just want to, I guess, take a step back to the, the numbers question. And, you said that the most pressure is coming from in-state detainees. And I'm interested in your thoughts about to what extent do some of our other social issues impact that, like homelessness and the, substance use issues that we have. And I guess my understanding of detainee status is, it's really only done when you have a fairly good question about whether that person is going to be showing up for court date. And so can you speak a little bit to sort of the reasons?
Yeah. Well, I think, Chair, maybe to rewind the clock back about a year, we were in your committee talking about in-cap beds, right, the PIP beds. And I think, it's a complex issue, and there's certainly a lack of resources in the community to provide some of the services. But, we've seen folks who are transported from a hospital because they're deemed, too violent. And, my mother's a healthcare worker, so I'm very sensitive to making sure our hospitals can function properly and safely. But, those folks are then transported to corrections, and they're not charged with a crime, but they are held at DOC. They're not even input into our system. It's all paper records. And, that adds pressure to our system. I think that's just one thread, but I think it tells a larger story of the ways in which when we see certain services in the community wind down, that pressure remains, but it's displaced, and it's usually displaced onto corrections. And I think that there will always be a tendency to see corrections as filling a need for the community that no one else is ready to provide. And I know that's something that the chair has often discussed in her committee. And I think that's something we should be particularly sensitive to.
Well, and I have to say that I know that, folks are trying to work collaboratively on it, but frankly, they haven't prioritized Chittenden County, which is troublesome to me in terms of increasing or reinstating access to those community-based services for that population. So, okay, thank you. That kind of confirms what I was thinking.
I think if I might tell an anecdote, one of my first visits to a correctional facility when I began this job was down in Southern State in Springfield. And I spent the night at the facility, shadowing the staff and talking to some of the incarcerated folks. And I remember there was an individual in the booking area who had just been brought in as a detainee, who had chewed the inside of his mouth and then painted his entire body with blood, which was very concerning to see. Obviously, someone in pretty acute mental distress, I would say, as a non-clinician. And I remember him kind of peering through the window of the door. And it was deeply troubling. And that was just one night at one of our facilities. And so I think that you can begin to imagine who is living inside of our correctional facilities today. And I do really wonder if that's the best place for them. I will say also that I have been consistently impressed and just deeply thankful for our staff who provide services to those folks. Sometimes they are their only advocates. This individual I know had no family that wanted to talk to him anymore. And I can't say what led him to that holding cell at Southern State, but I was deeply thankful for the really, the connection between the correctional officer, Officer McKee, and the compassion that he showed that individual in distress. But I think that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with.
I can't help but thank former Commissioner of Corrections, John Gorchak. And this was back in the late 90s, and he said, what you see in corrections is indicative of how successful our community partners and how successful our community services are. And that goes right to your question, Teresa.
Absolutely. It's a mirror. I think our correctional system is a mirror. And sometimes when we hold it up and look into it, we don't like what we see.
Corrections, it's hidden.
And that's why I'm so glad to have our partners from UVM, Abby Crocker, here to talk about print, because I think we need more light into our system, because I think it's important that people see these images and they understand what's happening inside of our facilities.
So we have another question from Wendy. Wendy's on Zoom.
Yes, thank you, Isaac. And it is distressing. And I very much agree that we need to elevate the knowledge of folks outside, because this is just unacceptable. But we've had situations where it's unacceptable before. And I think it's really important that we hit the ground running in the session. So you said you had a couple of ideas, and I'm sure obviously the corrections, the other folks have suggestions. We need to get actionable recommendations as soon as possible, would be my ask. And actually go, be creative. Don't just limit yourself to what we've done in the past, or what seems to be the obvious solution. But if you can get creative and throw some things out there that just are things that we normally wouldn't do. I mean, this is a crisis moment, and I appreciate you naming it that. So it's not really a question, it's a request. But if you want to respond, that's fine. That's good.
I thank you for that, Chair Harrison. And I think, I know there are many people who are not in favor of a new correctional facility, or have really differing ideas of what that should look like. I'm sort of outside of my scope. But I think as someone who's tasked with administering the system, I think we can do better. And I think that the cost of inaction, of apathy, is quite high, and you are seeing that.
And maybe people need to see that to understand the pressures. Any other questions or comments from committee members? Anything else, Isaac? Because I think we're right on time.
Thank you, Chair.
Before you get off the hot seat, I want to thank you for all the work that you've done. You've been with the department 4 years, 3 years?
Yep, 6+ years.
You've been a terrific asset to the department. You've been a terrific help, particularly to my committee and this committee here. And I really appreciate everything that you have done. I know you don't like being in the hot seat. You did really well the last few times, and I wish you the best
Thank you, Chair.
as you go forward. And we're going to miss you.
Thank you, Chair.
So we're on schedule, believe it or not. So I'm gonna kind of depend on you a little bit more, Martin. This next one is more your bailiwick, the firearm.
Sure.
Compliance Working Group report. So whoever from the AG's office. You ready? Yes, come on up to the hot seat. I think Isaac probably warmed it up. Isaac, before you go, don't be a stranger.
Okay.
Mhm.
See you around.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Hansen. I'm with the Attorney General's office. And I understand that you all have copies of this report. If anybody needs one, I have some extra ones. If anybody really wants one. But I'm really here to talk to you about our firearms compliance work group. And before I start, I wanted to mention that several of our committee members are here as well. And so if you all have questions for them, Henry Perro is here. Sarah Robinson is here. I think Kim McManus is joining us on remotely. So please feel free to ask them questions as well. I wanted to start with just a couple of statistics for you. And you may know these, but I think they are worth repeating. Access to a firearm makes it 5 times more likely that a victim will be killed when domestic abuse is present. Firearms account for 56% of the domestic violence related deaths in Vermont since we started tracking this data in 1994. Nationally, more than half of the women murdered by an intimate partner are killed with a firearm. And a national study in 2021 found that 68% of mass shootings that occurred between 2015 and 2019, the perpetrator had a history of domestic violence. So I bring those statistics to you to just emphasize the gravity of what we're dealing with here. And I wanted to start by talking about why a firearm surrender compliance work group. You all quite generously last term took this up and appointed a work group. Some of the members that I mentioned are in the room. All of them are listed in the report. And the reason that we asked, the Fatality Review Commission asked you to create that work group is because we have a very serious problem and we don't have solutions that allow us to take actionable steps to address them. And I'm speaking about the fact that we have laws in place, many great laws that you have passed that restrict someone from having a firearm who shouldn't have a firearm. We have relief from abuse orders, we have ERPOs, extreme risk protection orders, but compliance is left to the honor system. We don't have a system in Vermont that addresses compliance with making sure that folks who are not supposed to have firearms, who we've already decided should not have firearms, actually surrender them and don't have them. This is not about any new gun restrictions, and I want to make sure that I emphasize that. And I think that's one reason why our group was able to convalesce around these recommendations is we aren't talking about any new restrictions on firearms. We're talking about folks that we've already decided as a society they are prohibited from having firearms and shouldn't. And we need to figure out how we're going to make sure that that happens. So that's what this group was looking at. And it was a multidisciplinary group, and we had 13 recommendations that you'll see in that report. And the last recommendation, the 13th, has 14 subparts. So there's quite a lot to cover here. And please stop at any point that you want to talk about one of them. I'm going to run through them for you. They're all in the report. And if you have questions about why, or you have questions for other folks in the room, please do that. So what the recommendations are, the first one involves creating a model law enforcement protocol. That's so that the police know what they can and should be doing in a situation where they encounter someone who is not supposed to have a firearm, and what legal steps can they take to make sure that they recover that firearm and that they make sure that it's enforced that the person can't purchase additional firearms. It's about how we partner effectively with our firearm dealers like Henry Parent's shop, how we partner with them so that we can provide storage in situations where storage is needed. How do we make sure that a firearm has been collected? And how do we share that information with people who need access to that information, like to the victim who may need to do safety planning around whether or not a firearm was actually collected or not? We thought one thing that you all might consider is expanding the use of VINE, which I know is something you assigned to another committee, and they've been looking at the Victim Information Notification Everyday System. Currently used by corrections after people are convicted. So I'm sure you know that. But in other states, it's used in lots of other ways too. It's used, for instance, to notify a plaintiff when an order has been served. And it can also provide information about firearms and whether firearms were seized by the police. So something for us to be considering as a state as whether we can have an automated notification system that includes that information. The next recommendation has to do with return of service. And what the return of service is it's the document that the court and other parties can rely on to see that an order of the court has actually been delivered to the person that the order is applicable to. And we want to make sure that that return of service not only provides that critical information, the order was in fact served, but also how many firearms were surrendered, what type of firearms were surrendered, and that somebody took a step to notify the plaintiff about whether or not those firearms were surrendered. This is an example of what we call form-driven compliance, which means that the officer seeing this and serving this order can use the form to help drive some level of compliance with the order by making sure the firearms are collected and by making sure that the victim is provided that very crucial information. Another thing that we're recommending, and this is recommendation 4, is that defendants need information to help them understand how to comply with the order. So we can't assume that people know how to store a firearm, know where they can go to store a firearm, know the process for doing that. And so we want to make sure that we provide information to every defendant so they know what their responsibilities and obligations are. Another group that I work with, the Firearms Technical Assistance Project, has worked on that and has provided a draft of that to the Family Oversight Committee. So that recommendation is well underway at this point. The next recommendation is to make sure that defendants are orally informed that they can't have a firearm. So right now it says it in the order. Folks can read the order, but sometimes people need to hear information in more than one place. They need to have it reinforced. Some people do better with information that is presented to them orally. And it also has to do with emphasis on the importance of it. You know, if the court takes time to actually highlight something and tell you that you have to do it, it has an impact as well on demonstrating that that's an important part of the order. And conversely, orally informing the litigants if the order is no longer in effect. So sometimes what happens is there may be a temporary order that restricts access to firearms, but for whatever reason, the burden is not met to obtain a final order. It's important for folks to understand the implications of that. It's especially important for the plaintiff to understand that the firearm will be returned to the defendant. So we want to make sure that they're orally informed in court about that as well. Background checks for third parties. There's no requirement right now that a background check be done on a third party before they are given a firearm. And we want to make sure that anybody we're giving firearms to is legally able to possess them. There's a process already in our statute, but it's not being used. Again, this is an example of form-based, form-driven compliance by putting the background check, that the background check has been done right on the form that the court would be approving if they find that a third party is an appropriate person to hold a firearm. There's already in our statute in 20 VSA 2307, subsection B 2A, there's already the ability for the court to not allow relinquishment to that third party if it will not adequately protect the safety of the victim. So we have a process in place and we want to make sure that it's being used.
Can I interrupt and just ask a question about that?
Yeah.
We have that in place right now in statute.
Yeah.
How can we enforce, how do we know it's being enforced?
Well, I can tell you that it's not being right now, but if a defendant, in order for a third party to hold the firearm, is given this information and told, okay, if you want that person, for instance, when they're serving the order, the defendant says, I gave it to my cousin. A lot of times that's the end of the discussion. It shouldn't be the end of the discussion. Partly through this law enforcement protocol and partly through everybody understanding what needs to happen there, the defendant would need to surrender the firearm to the law enforcement agency or to an FFL. They would have to make their cousin aware that that was the only way that the cousin would be allowed to hold the firearm for them, is if the court approves them. So that we're not just, not knowing who the cousin is, not knowing whether the cousin is even authorized to hold a firearm. We need to tighten our process so that we can find out the answers to those questions. So if somebody in court says to the judge, when the judge says, you can't have firearms, they said, I gave them to my cousin. Who's your cousin? There's a process in place for that, and we have to have a background check done on the cousin. So these are just small steps. These are not the full answer, but these are small steps of things that we could be doing to make sure that we aren't inadvertently allowing firearms to stay in the hands of someone that is not supposed to have them. Because many times what we've heard in fatality review is maybe the defendant gave it to the cousin and maybe they didn't, but a simple phone call from the police to that cousin, a lot of times will determine whether that's actually true. Sometimes the cousin is holding the firearm, but if you were to talk to the cousin, they don't want to be holding the firearm. They're afraid of the defendant. If the defendant comes to their house and says, give me my gun, they're going to give them their gun. So those are the kind of situations we're trying to prevent by making sure that there is some oversight, some small steps taken in those situations to make sure that this person legally authorized to hold a gun. That's what the background check does. And also that the person is amenable to the restrictions, that they can't give it to the defendant, and that they're able to enforce them. Because we've seen plenty of people in the times that we've reviewed cases in fatality review that did not feel that they could prevent, for instance, their adult child from coming into their home and taking their firearm.
So apparently.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, and we do have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
We opened up the gate here, which is probably pretty good. Jenny.
Yeah, thanks. So as soon as you mentioned background checks, I think of the backlog and how long it takes to have those things happen. And I also I'm interested in the number of these types of background checks that we're looking at, and any consideration that you folks gave during your meetings about how to make this all happen. Obviously, it's the Judiciary Committee's responsibility to maybe take a look at it, but I'm just concerned about the timing here because it seems to be something that has to happen right away. And we have that backlog, and what thinking you folks did during the discussion.
Thank you for that question. And if I don't completely answer it, I'll defer to some of the other folks in the room, like Henry, who can probably answer that much better than I can. But what we're talking about is a NICS check. And so I don't know if it's the same thing you're thinking of, because this is the same check that somebody who goes into Perro's gun shop and wants to purchase a firearm, they have to clear this background check. It's the same process. If I understand correctly, there are some shops that if they don't get an answer within a certain amount of time, that they have a proceed policy, and they're allowed to do that under federal law. But generally they're getting an answer, if they can get an answer within the time frame that the federal government has specified for getting that. Is there anything you want to add to that, Henry?
Well, it's a minimum 72-hour hold under state law anyway. So if we receive to proceed instantly, state law kicks in and there's a 72-hour cooling off period.
So Henry, could you just identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Henry Perro. I own Perro's Gun Shop and Police Supplies in Waterbury.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Okay, okay.
So let me just, I guess,
Martin and then Wendy.
one of the things we'll need to look at is this kind of transfer, which has a 72-hour period. I didn't notice it was in the recommendations of considering, at least for this kind of transfer in this situation, that there's not the 72 hours, but that's something presumably we'd be looking at when we take this up. But was there any talk about that?
I think, I mean, it is one of the recommendations that we make this all consistent. So right now, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit now, if I understand your question, under 20 VSA 2307, which is our firearms storage law, we have a 3-day period. But in the minds of some of the folks that sell firearms in our state, it's a little bit confusing and it's a little bit contrary to what federal law says. So our desire is to make this very easy and clear for them that you can proceed once you have the background check, not before that. And there were some folks who, in reading our state statute, thought that it did require them, or at least the state wanted them to return the gun within 3 days, even if the background check hadn't cleared. I know that wasn't in the intention, but it was being kind of read that way, and it was creating some reluctance on the part of firearms dealers to want to provide storage. So we don't want there to be we want that to be very clear and easy for everyone. With the third party thing, it's really up to the judge to decide whether or not this person is an appropriate person. And the background check is one piece of information that informs that. That's sort of like the lowest level piece, right? Is the person even legally allowed to have a gun? But there are other questions to be asked. And so the judge may need to, ask other questions besides just whether the person passed a background check. So I just want to be clear about that. We are recommending that there always be a background check before anybody releases a gun. We know that FFLs are required to do that. They have federal regulations that require them to run a background check. Our police agencies don't. Some of them do, a lot of them do, but if it's a third party they're releasing it to, it's not a criminal case, there's actually nothing that tells them you need to run a background check before you hand this gun over. And we want to make sure that that's something that is happening. So I jumped ahead just a little bit.
Another question.
Yeah, oh yeah, go ahead.
Wendy?
Great, thank you. I'd like to hear more about any discussions that you had about the storage facility itself. I work with a organization in Windham County, Swords to Plowshares, and their mission is to receive guns voluntarily that were not involved in any issues, but folks have a really hard time finding a place to give a gun to. There aren't organizations who will take them. And in our conversations, evidently, the state police used to have a storage facility for unwanted guns. So it's really hard to find storage was my takeaway. So if you can just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And I just want to preface this by saying we weren't looking at places that would just take a gun voluntarily because somebody didn't want to own it anymore. That's a question we didn't address, but I'm glad to know there's an organization like yours that can help with that.
No, and I understand that, but obviously getting those guns away from folks are increased safety, but we weren't able to find any, and we were working with law enforcement. So evidently there was gun storage previously that is not there now, was my understanding.
The state police do have the ability to hold guns at each of their barracks, and we were talking about non-evidentiary firearms, so I want to make sure that's really clear. We were talking about non-evidentiary firearms, meaning they're not going to be used in any kind of criminal case. They're not part of evidence. and also guns that are required to be removed by a court order. So those were the things we were looking at. And state police does have at every one of their barracks, they have a space where they can hold non-evidentiary firearms, but it's not a huge space. And there are lots of small departments that don't really have any space. At least that's what we've heard for many years. So part of what we were trying to do with this work group was to improve our partnership with FFLs, with federally licensed firearms dealers who have the capacity to store firearms. Several of them have told me they have plenty of capacity. Folks will have to pay for that. It's a service, but they can hopefully fulfill the need that the state has to store firearms so that we don't have to start investing money in building new storage facilities. What we're hoping to do is to improve, that's part of the goal of this work group, was to make this a more attractive proposition for FFLs. So for instance, making it really clear what the 72 hours means. We don't want them to feel like they don't know really what their obligations are and that they could get into trouble. We want to make sure that they understand them, that they feel partners with the police, that they can provide this very important service in the community and also get paid for it. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but we do have FFLs and we're trying to make sure that more FFLs, that's the point behind this group, that more FFLs will agree to hold firearms and feel that that is not a risk to them by doing that. Because they have secure facilities, they know how to comply with all of the federal regulations that are required for holding firearms. So it really does make a lot of sense for us to partner with them rather than ask police to build additional storage facilities or something like that.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
So now you can keep going.
All right, well, I just want to make sure I'm right where I left off. So if I missed something, somebody tell me. We've talked about background checks. The court's already working on a video. They have a very, very old video. The video doesn't talk at all about firearms compliance. So they're doing this anyway. We want to make sure that part of what that video does is provide information to litigants about how they comply with the firearms storage requirement, how they comply with making sure their firearms are surrendered and also that they don't purchase any additional ones. And we want to make sure that they're required to view that because right now the video is on the website, but not everybody's going to track that down, right, before they have a hearing. So we want to make sure that the court requires litigants to watch it. We want to be able to track the information. We've talked about the additional information about firearms that we would like to see on the return of service form, the form that shows that the defendant's been served with one of these orders, like an ERPO and an RFA. We want to make sure we can track that information so we know how many firearms have been surrendered. So we're able to provide that to partners. For instance, if the victim needs to know whether or not a firearm was surrendered, that's information that we can obtain from the return of service and share. And this is a crucial one. The 10th one is a process to capture the defendant's status of compliance. And what that means is right now, even if you read your order, there's nothing that tells you to inform anybody about what you've done with your firearms. We want there to be a form that defendants can complete that lets us know how their firearms are being held while the order is in effect. That's going to allow us, for the folks who don't do that form, that's going to allow us to focus on those individuals and rather than having to try to ask every single person individually whether or not they actually complied with the order and if they were having problems complying with the order. Maybe they got confused, maybe they lost the instruction sheet, but we want to be able to focus on the people who actively are not providing that information. And this is where the 2 law enforcement positions come in. So this is a legislative ask. Right now, we don't have anybody in the state, and the sheriff's departments, 2 sheriff departments have actually indicated an interest in doing this, but they can't do it without additional resources. So we'd like to see 2 law enforcement positions open to any law enforcement agencies that are interested in doing this work, but funding 2 positions that can work on compliance. So for instance, folks who we don't know if they actually surrendered their firearms, those agents might go and knock on their door. They might call them. It's a simple follow-up that isn't happening right now. And they might not have to concentrate on a lot of folks once we have a process in place where defendants are providing this information, they can narrow it down to just the people they don't get the information from. And the next one was to have a hearing like we're doing today. So yay, that one's already happening. And then the last one has a number of subparts, as I mentioned. This is 20 VSA 2307, the storage law that I mentioned earlier. You all last worked on the storage law in 2013. And a few things have changed considerably since then. And a few things, just as we always find, right, they don't work exactly the way that we hope they will work. So one thing that has changed is, I think when you all first passed that law, the thought process was that we would be speaking only to defendants who wanted to store their firearms. But we found that it's really police agencies, a lot of police agencies, that need the ability to store firearms because they don't have space on site to do that. And so we want to make sure that the statute allows them to do that we're very clear about that it's defendants can store with FFLs and also that police agencies can. And then we need to create a good partnership there so that there is a process, because every step of the way you need documentation to make sure that if a police agency has transferred a firearm to an FFL, that the defendant is told that. The defendant needs that. Transparency is so important. The defendant needs to know, what are the costs involved? My firearm has been transferred to a FFL. We want to make sure that they understand what their obligations are. They understand how they can get their firearm back after the order is expired. And we want to make sure that we don't create disincentives. So when this statute first passed, there was a huge disincentive built right in. And that was that any proceeds, in the event that this person did not come back to get their gun, any proceeds were supposed to go to them. And if you think about it, if you're not able to contact that person and they've had no interaction with you, and you don't know where they are, how are you supposed to get them those proceeds? And it's also a disincentive to those agencies and to those FFLs to agree to do this. So in most states, what happens is they're allowed to keep the proceeds. If you blow it off, don't pay your storage fees, don't communicate, your gun can be sold and they keep those proceeds. And they found that that works well in a lot of other places. So we'd like to see our statute do the same thing. And, immunity as well for if something goes wrong and they sell it, but they followed all of the rules they were supposed to follow, we don't want them to be on the hook for a lawsuit with the defendant over not getting their firearms back. Right now, the statute requires that they store ammunition, but ammunition is hazardous waste for the state police. So if they have to hold on to a bunch of ammunition, there's a lot of expense and difficulty built into that. And same with FFLs. You can go into, as Henry pointed out to us, you can go into, hardware store and purchase ammunition. So it's really not regulated in the same way. And we're creating a burden on those agencies when we ask them to store ammunition as well. So we're asking you to take that out. That's not to say the court could still order a defendant not to have ammunition. They could still order a third party to hold on to their ammunition, but we don't want that obligation placed on law enforcement or on FFLs. And then there's also, the legislature contemplated this window where a defendant might have their firearm go directly to a third party. And that's something that you all decided a long time ago. Not all states allow that, but currently Vermont does. And we're not asking you to change that, but we're asking that that process be very tight. so that in the event that the defendant wants a third party to hold their firearms, they would need to present that party basically at the final hearing so that the judge could decide whether or not that was an appropriate person to do that. And we wanted to make sure, though, that that doesn't then slow down the hearings where defendants come in and say, oh, this person couldn't be here today, so let's have a hearing next week. Or that the judge is then put in a position where they have a very heavy docket that day and they feel they have to hear this request that day. So there's a little bit of, an escape hatch there, if you will, that like, ideally, if this is going to happen, it would happen then. But if it can't happen, then the defendant's just going to file a motion, just like they would do right now. And the firearm would initially need to go to the FFL or to law enforcement, and the third party approval would have to happen at a different time. So I know that's pretty far in the weeds here. There's also the 72-hour return, making that clear. That's in there as well. I don't know if you have questions about any of those, subparts, but again, I want to emphasize these recommendations, they're not a complete transformation from the honor system, but they are a start, and we need to start. In fatality review, we don't hear from families that they had no idea that the defendant had a gun. I can't think of one case where somebody has told us we had no idea they had a gun. What we do hear is that the victim never thought they would do this, that they had thoughts of harming themselves, but they never thought that they would harm another person. And they knew that they were experiencing mental health issues. They were thinking about access to mental health services, which of course is very, very important, but not thinking so much about limiting access to firearms. So when you think about all the terrible situations that are going on in our country right now and have gone on in Vermont in the last year, where folks had access to firearms that really shouldn't have access to firearms, we can do better than what we're doing right now if we start to focus on making sure that we take some small steps towards ensuring compliance. States who have done this, they have seen a reduction in lethality. So I do want to mention that too. Any other questions? Because that's all I have for you.
Yeah, just one main one. So it does lay out certainly, you'll be able to track how well the legislature is doing in addressing your recommendations, because it's spelled out pretty clearly here. Is there any thing in place or thought of as far as just monitoring? There's a lot that the court needs to do. Is there going to be monitoring just to make sure that that's being implemented as well? The changes in order, the change as far as orally telling the individual they're not allowed to have a firearm, et cetera?
So I'm glad you asked that. We did think about that. And we actually would think that the legislature could be helpful there. By doing, what you're doing today, I mean, at some point in the future, asking the folks who have had recommendations that they take certain steps, asking them for an update, a status on how that's going.
Will the Fatality Review Commission kind of have that as one of the things they will do as well?
Sure. I mean, we can do that, but I can tell you that in the past, we haven't found it tremendously effective. I remember there was once where we had a recommendation for the Department of Education. I kept calling different people, getting passed around to different people. I think that that's a really crucial role that the legislature provides when you say, hey, we commissioned this report and we see these recommendations and we've worked on the recommendations that we can do. Is there anything else that needs to be done? How's it going? What's the update? Give us a status report on how it's going, for instance, in the court system with making these recommendations happen. I think that's really effective and keeping it on people's radar and having them come in and say, because nobody wants to come in and say, we haven't done anything with any of the recommendations that, that you handed to us in this report 6 months ago or a year ago. So I do think that it's really helpful to have the legislature ask, because they may run into, maybe there's something we didn't anticipate or they didn't anticipate. And for you to hear if there's anything more that the legislature can do to make that workable, I think is really helpful. I mean, we were a time-limited group. That was by design. We were eligible to have 6 meetings and we've had 5. So we could theoretically have 1 more meeting as well. But I do think that the legislature could be very helpful in following up and asking for a status on how those recommendations are going with these other entities that we're all part of this group too, by the way.
Becky.
So, thank you. This is
Sure.
Very informative. So in terms of the report and the recommendations, so I'm looking at the membership of the group. Was it unanimous in terms of the recommendations, the unanimous from the group to support it, or were there some divisions?
We went through them all and asked anybody to speak up. Anybody to speak up if this wasn't, if they had wanted anything to change. We did make adjustments to them. We didn't take formal votes on each recommendation, but we had everybody in the room with the recommendations in front of them and made tweaks as it was suggested to make them work for those organizations. So yes, and our office asked everyone to review the report and sign off on the recommendations.
So, and I think that you had somebody from the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, somebody was a member of the group, so at least used to be Chief Burke. So you had some input from somebody because you're asking them to do model policy. So
Yeah, and that did come from those folks, and the representative from VSP indicated that the Commissioner of Public Safety was the person who was in charge of instructing that group what to do. So that's why that recommendation is written in the way that it is.
We do have the 2 chairs of our respective judiciary committees here on this committee, Representative Martin Locke and Senator Nader Hashim, who's chair of the Senate Judiciary. So I'm sure you're going to be spending quite a bit of time in front of those 2 committees, as well as there are members of this committee here that do sit in the Judiciary Committee. I'm assuming we'll have some work. Assuming.
We welcome that. So thank you. Yeah, anything we can do to be helpful, we'd like to do that.
Any further questions from the members? Yes.
Nothing from me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the members, the rest of the members of our commission.
Introduce who's here from the working group.
Sure. Henry Perro, Heather Holter, Sarah Robinson, and I'm trying to see if Kim.
Kim is
Kim's
on.
on.
Okay. Oh, yeah, a little bit out direction. Okay, there's Kim McManus.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for zooming in. We really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, folks. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the PRIN project with Abby Crocker from UVM. And the PRIN program, I'm just gonna has been with us in Vermont since about 2020, doing some preliminary work. And that finished up, but we're continuing to work with the University of Vermont to continue into that work of PRIN, which means Prison Research and Innovation Network, which really means looking at our current functioning within our correctional facilities and what's working really well and what's could be improved. And every facility is going to approach this a little differently. Some facilities may incorporate it wholeheartedly, other facilities may be a little resistant. So, Abby, I'm turning it over to you. Welcome. You've been working on this for going on 5 years.
Bit of a time, yes. So thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Abby Crocker. I am the Director of Justice Research Center at the University of Vermont and a partner with the Department of Corrections for the Vermont Prison Research and Innovation Network. And I just want to name like Michael Groner's here, who is
You can't see me.
Yes, you are.
a key collaborator and someone who's actually been part of Prince since the very beginning as well, just through different roles and different hats, now in a suit in the room.
Now in a suit, I didn't recognize him.
And Haley Summer is here as well. And you know, Haley and Karen Benway, who's a colleague at Justice Research Center, and Anthony Giordano Gio, who's our like essential champion down at Southern State Correctional Facility, is online. So I'm hoping that Gio will, all of my partners here will pop up and sort of contribute to this conversation. And shout out to you, Chair Emmons. You've been part of this too as well. So my goal today is really just to provide like sort of like a PRIN 101, this sort of high level kind of thing with a hope and an invitation for further conversation moving forward. So please ask questions as we go. So really the big key messages that I'm hoping to convey today is like, what is PRIN and why does it exist? Sort of the brief overview of what Chair Emmons just shared, like what's the origins and the history of PRIN. Sort of core to PRIN are the Vermont Prison Surveys. So I'm going to really talk about those, as well as the impact PRIN has had, and over the last 5-6 years, what are some of the key lessons that we've learned and how has that shaped where PRIN is today and where we are moving forward. So right off the bat, sort of what is PRIN? PRIN most functionally is this long-term research practice partnership between the Department of Corrections and UVM. It has 3 sort of core elements to it. The first is independent data and research, sort of this sort of from a trusted sort of outside entity, which is UVM in this case, but centering the voices of those who know these systems best, the lived experiences expertise. So that's the folks who are currently incarcerated in our facilities and the staff who work in our facilities. And when we think about combining this data and this expertise, it's not just to create new knowledge, it's actually to take that knowledge and do something with it, have action for true systems transformation. And it exists, a lot of what we're talking about in Isaac's testimony this morning, that prisons, they impact a lot of things. And despite their scale and their impact, they are the least transparent public institutions in our country, and the most understudied as well. And I think we see that lack of transparency creates a lack of understanding. And at the same time, it means that a lot of times the decisions that go in shaping our prisons aren't really driven by data or research. It's driven by sort of reactionary to what's happening sort of in our communities today. And where do PRINs come from? So this is my first time here talking to you all about PRIN, but PRIN actually comes back from 2019. In 2019, I sort of became involved with corrections because I started teaching statistics inside the women's facility, the Chittenden Correctional Region, CRCF, we know that. So I was teaching statistics inside CRCF, and it was my first time in a facility, and I was like, whoa, you know, this is interesting, and thought, you know, maybe a lot of what has shaped this is this lack of transparency and this lack of research. And so reached out to the commissioner at the time and said, well, what do you think about potentially adding a research program into corrections? And we were actually was a well received. And during the summer of 2019, we took a couple tours down to, in partnership with the Department of Corrections, we went down and toured the True Unit in Connecticut together. We went over to Maine and toured their new reentry facility together, and really got to thinking about what could we do differently? How could we use sort of a research and data partnership to do something differently? And the timing was just right, because as we were having these conversations, a grant application came out, a competitive application from the Urban Institute to join their Prison Research and Innovation Initiative. And that initiative, that funded national initiative, was to say, like, prisons need to be less, they need to be more transparent. We need data inside our prisons. And what might happen if we take corrections department and independent researchers and put them together and center community voice, recognizing that those impacted directed by these systems are the experts. If we do that, what could potentially happen? And so We decided to apply for this grant together. It was a state decision to apply for this grant. And we were lucky that we got this grant in 2020. And Vermont participated in this 5-year consortium along with Missouri, Delaware, Iowa, and Colorado. So 5 states were part of this, really with support and coordination from the Urban Institute. And that really gave the foundations of what PRIN is today. As part of PRIN in Vermont, we had a pilot facility where this work sort of started to happen, and that was Southern State Correctional Facility. And we had steering and executive committees as well. And the steering committee was really meant to be like leadership from the Department of Corrections, because we know that's like sort of how change needs to happen. And then at the executive committee level as well. And that's where Chair Emmons, you were part of that big piece. And that's really taking folks from outside of corrections but are involved to try to help make sure that, you know, the things we're learning from PRIN have this mechanism and infrastructure for action. And so just want to highlight a couple of the pictures that we have here on this slide. The top picture is the final wrap up from the Urban Institute grant, which happened in March of 2025. We also have sort of the community engaged research in action in that bottom corner. And then really also highlighting that, you know, that there's a lot of the surveys, in which we'll talk about in a minute, highlight a lot of the real extreme challenges for those who work and are inside our facilities. And amongst that, there's also rays of hope. And I really would love this picture of the prison debate team at Southern State Correctional Facility, because this is one of the kinds of things that started to be able to happen once prisons opened their doors to people and were bringing folks inside. And the prison debate team in Southern, which comprised a large of our PRIN partners, they debated Wake Forest debate team on a Norwegian model for corrections, and they won, and it was awesome. So highlight there. And here I'm just going to talk a bit about these Vermont prison surveys. And I think I shared copies of those, hopefully, but I would definitely encourage folks to spend a time with them. The prison surveys were administered 3 times. So we have 3 years of data so far from these prison surveys. But what makes them really unique is that they were co-created with corrections staff and incarcerated individuals. This is not an instrument that like UVM developed and then went in and administered. My partner at the time, Kathy Fox, and I spent a lot of time inside the facility, just walking around, asking people, what do you think it's important for others outside of the facility to know what it's like to work in corrections or what it's like to be incarcerated in corrections? And we created these instruments, one for corrections staff and one for incarcerated individuals. And what's important to note is, as a researcher, I went in thinking, let's try to keep these instruments short. Like, let's aim for like 30 questions each. That's how people will take it. But it was our directly impacted partners, the staff and the incarcerated folks, who were like, no, we got to tell the real story. And so these instruments ended up being 150 questions each. And every single question was important. And how we decided what questions and what the order was, how long they were going to be, really truly was this collaborative effort. Then we administered the surveys for the first time in 2021 in the facility, paper-based, anonymous, and confidential. We are inside the facilities when they're actually administered and given back to us. And then I think that co-creation was essential in the success of these surveys, because usually if somebody administers a survey and you get a response rate about 20%, that's pretty typical and pretty standard. These surveys had response rates of between 70 and 80%. And I think what's more impressive is, these surveys were 150 questions, but we had a nearly 99% completion rate. So when people took the surveys, they really genuinely took them and they took the whole thing. And anecdotally, what we heard when people would hand the surveys back to us or when we'd be in the hallways of the facilities is, this is a good survey. This really measures what it's like to be inside, and this is what it means to tell this story. And not surprising, because the people who experience it the most are the ones who created it. And then what these surveys do is they provide almost too much information. Like it's everything you want to know. But it really helps to provide sort of that flashlight, that insight that's been missing from what's actually happening inside. And when we do these surveys over time, you can start to see, are we really moving the needle on things or are we not? And then what I want to do is mention and encourage folks to spend time with those surveys. And I can't go through them in a lot of detail, but I want to highlight a couple things what we've done with the data. So when we take the surveys, we get the information, the first thing we do is something called the data walk, which means we take the data, we turn it into posters, and we hang it up inside the facility. And then we walk around and talk to people and also give people a written opportunity to say, you know, what do we need to know when we look at this data? Like, what do you want people who are making decisions based on these data to actually understand and what to know? And what do you think? There's a lot here. What do you think is the most important thing that we should be addressing right away? And we asked the whole facility that, and we got lots of great qualitative data, lots of great stories, a lot of great context to understand these statistics in true settings. And one of the big things we heard, though, when we asked everybody in the facility, what are the things we really need to focus on? Incarcerated folks said we really need to focus on preparation for release. So preparation for release was the #1 thing to vote that incarcerated folks said we need to focus on. And for staff, staffing challenges. That was the #1 thing that we needed to focus on. And so I shared some key highlights just from those two areas here, but they're complex and interconnected. And I think these quotes really highlight that. The prison doesn't prepare people for release. The prison doesn't have enough staff to operate the facility. And then the idea of feeling disconnected. So people who are doing the work inside the facilities often receive like, oh, we got this new program. Oh, we've got this new change. But actually integrating it so it's successfully implemented inside the facility is a challenge because oftentimes the folks inside the facility haven't been in those conversations. And we hear that here. Other people make decisions about our daily work. They have no understanding how their actions impact people who actually do the work. And we see that sort of in practice. We come up with great ideas, here, now go do it. But those great ideas can't be implemented with success because we're not thinking about how it actually embeds in daily work. And we see that in these sort of guiding statistics here. 94% of staff do not feel that they have enough staff to meet the needs of the prison, exacerbated with more people coming into the facility. 83% of incarcerated individuals do not feel prepared for release. So these are sort of the benchmarks that guided a lot of the priority actions after that first baseline year. And those insights, the whole purpose of the survey is to get this deeper understanding and use those insights to actually guide change. And the changes that have happened because of PRIN are really sort of at the operational and cultural level, as well as more of the sort of philosophical change of we've got to open doors and get more partners coming inside. Some of the operational practices that were adjusted were more staffing supports, more effort and recruitment strategies. PRIN is now embedded in the strategic vision for the department. Also thinking about, with the Medicaid 1115 reentry project, really trying to really move the needle on reentry by bringing in more healthcare services and a better support there. And also that represents, I would say, sort of a cultural shift as well, in that, in particular with the Medicaid 1115 waiver, that team at DOC is talking to our PRIN partners at Southern. So thinking about, hey, if we really want this to be successfully implemented, let's talk to the people who are most directly impacted by it so we can work through some of those issues before it's rolled out and then have those feedback loops to make sure the implementation is successful as well. Inside the facility itself, Southern opened a beautiful coffee shop where staff and incarcerated folks have coffee together. It really humanizes the experience and really has truly changed the culture. They've also opened an honors unit, which one helps with incarcerated folks and helps with staffing because it's indirect supervision. So the unit doesn't need a full-time officer inside. And there's also this recognition that what we can't do is just keep adding work on top of the understaffed officers and corrections team inside the facility. So what we need to do is open doors and have community partners come inside and offer some of the services that they're experts at. And that really opened the doors for key community partner contracts like the peer recovery, the Turning Point expansion, which I hope Isaac is successful in continuing in the other room that he's in. More restorative justice approaches, bringing folks from community justice centers inside the facilities to start helping with that bridge to outside. Post-secondary education, the expansion of the CCV program. Parental incarceration. I know it's beautiful to see Lund up in Northern now as well. So these are the kinds of programs that are so needed for successful reentry, but we can't put on the shoulders of staff. So we really need to make sure that the doors are open to bring those folks in. And along the way, so as we really established the roots of PRIN, I think we've learned a lot from our successes, but probably more from our failures. Because I think that's the idea is if it was easy, it would be done already. And this is a system that's had a closed door for hundreds of years. And so to truly open your doors and make yourself vulnerable to what is not a very pretty sort of picture that we really see in the data takes a lot. It takes a culture change in itself. So we really recognize that we need to sort of build these check-in moments along the way and not to give up when we're at the lowest, because if we work through our low points, we can keep moving forward. And these data really help remind us of the why of the work. We can't operate systems like this. We can't have Vermonters who are experiencing work conditions and carceral conditions like this. So in order for us to actually move meaningful change, we have to work through successes and failures. We really have to recognize that those who are experiencing it are the ones who know it best. And as we work together, how we work together, the trust and the relationships we build are so important. And we've definitely seen those grow and strengthen over time. A clear, clean contract doesn't equal trust and relationships. So I think that's what's so valuable about PRIN today versus PRIN 6 years ago. Also huge insights how complicated change is, how complex this challenge is, and how interconnected all these systems are. One solution is not going to fix this. It's going to take all of us working together across systems and across programs. And so where has that left us today? So we have this deep history. And where has this actually brought us? What does PRIN look like today? And this is really what we've tried to spend much of 2025 on is once we moved out of the Urban Institute funding and that national consortium support, which also helped guide us through a lot of our ups and downs. We had this external national contract that kept us moving. Once we lost that and, the program ended naturally at the end of 2024, we all recognize this is way too valuable to stop. It's really that we're just starting. So that's what we spent 2025 doing is really bolstering that system. And that includes, some very functional things that we need to sustain through individuals. I mean, like our fabulous Isaac is leaving at the end of the year. That's going to be a blow. And we still need PRIN to continue. So we have a contract with the Department of Corrections, which I shared in sort of the materials here, that keeps sort of our legal pieces in place and sort of our commitment to each other to keep this going. We've really spent time bolstering Southern as the anchor facility, and that has been something that our colleague Anthony Giordano, who's here hidden behind the slides at this point, he's really been amazing at championing and has been sort of an instrumental person for PRIN at Southern and really bolstering what does it mean to be the anchor facility and what's that going to mean as a mentor role as we start to roll out to other organizations, other facilities in the state. And how do we, with all of this complex sort of movement of incarcerated individuals, turnover of staff, how do we get a stable PRIN council so we can make sure that lived experience remains at the heart of PRIN? And we really aim to institutionalize the data capacity at UVM, and UVM invested in the development and the establishment of this moving from a justice research initiative into an official center, sort of staffed with a data team and key resources to make sure that this can keep moving forward and can serve as a backbone, a long-term backbone organization to make sure that the work continues long after people like me are gone. And that's when we think about looking ahead for PRIN. So we really look to stabilize the PRIN infrastructure, and now we want to think about expanding it. And the idea is we want to be in all 6 facilities. We want the surveys in all 6 facilities, and we want that institutional support for data-informed change. And I think that's a big reason why, like Michael Groner is going to be important. Michael Groner is the one. He champions our steering committee, which is really a representation at the executive level in the Department of Corrections. And so we need people like that who want these data, who trust these data, who can say, oh, gosh, we got to do something about this. And so really support for that data-informed change so that people in central office can make sure that the folks in the facilities are supported for those initiatives. At UVM, we've really worked to expand our data analytic capacity. We spent a lot of time over the last 5 years developing these surveys, administering the surveys, and turning them into reports. And we are now very well poised to use those data. So not only are we going to get the next set of surveys in 2026, this June, but we are also have a team of data folks who can turn it into data reports and make it useful. So it's not just one big, here's everything all the time, all at once, but like if folks in this committee or your sort of standing committees through the session want to take a deeper dive into any of those data points specifically, we're here to help. So that's sort of one of the resources. We want to make sure the data are used for action, not only at the department level, but at the policy and the state level as well. And then we really want to mention that we want to recognize that all of those individual changes that have come out of PRIN are fantastic on their own. Like each one of those is really, really important, but together is how we're going to see change. And so really thinking about the data, providing the insights, and then making the changes, but then coming together to see how that collection of efforts actually moves the needle. And before I move on to sort of what that looks like, I just want to highlight sort of our partners in the data team at the Justice Research Center here. Again, the bottom corner there of those awesome, beautiful art pictures sort of hanging on the wall, hanging on the fence at Southern is sort of a beautiful quilting project that's happening right now at Southern, sort of spurred by PRIN. And then Marble Valley, which is, we're working with Superintendent James and identified PRIN champion at Marble Valley, Jesse Rose, who's both fantastic, are opening their doors and saying, okay, we're ready. So they've joined our steering committee and we're ready to start there in 2026. And then, so what does this mean? And when I'm talking about sort of that collective impact approach, and this, I think, really ties exactly to sort of where Isaac's testimony was winding up. Prisons are a mirror of our society, and we see that with these data. What we see inside the prisons is shaped what's happening outside of the prisons. And the PRIN research, these survey data, the qualitative stories, and the administrative records that we get really help us see that and actually shine back on what's happening. But these data themselves have fueled changes that the department can control. So the department can control their own operational practices, the aiming for culture change, and having this, hey, open doors, let's bring your partners inside. And this is sort of where we're at today. This is happening, and it's where we move forward. And traditionally, what you might see at this point is, okay, now we have Kids Part, now we have CCV, now we have Turning Point, now we have restorative justice. Is that program working sort of individually? But what we really need is, are they all working together? Oops. It's a great slide. Okay, there. Are they all working together? And a collective impact model is a proven model that actually says, instead of looking at each thing on its own, let's bring all these things together. Let's have everyone do what they're best at, but let's strategically align these efforts and bring in new partners. So we know the folks who are showing up inside our correction system, who are providing services inside, but there are a lot of people who are not doing that right now and should be. And we have a particular unique opportunity here in Vermont with our Agency of Human Services. You know, Vermont is the only state in the country where the Department of Corrections is in human services and not public safety. So there is a huge opportunity for greater alignment across our health, public health care systems as well. So bringing that in, and then again, making sure that the focus is in a shared measurement and how these changes are working together, not on their own, and so that we can truly actually move the needle. And this broader collective impact strategy moving forward has sort of a new national intention play. So the University of Vermont partnered with the Vermont Law School and the University of San Diego to establish the National Center on Restorative Justice, which is a federally funded initiative. And this group is really highlighting this collective impact strategy based on the great work that Vermont has done to date to really try to move the needle in the face of a really complex, ever-changing sort of social structure that exists in our communities. And if we don't keep trying, it's just never going to work. And I think what we see a lot is we throw money at problems, problems don't go away, maybe sometimes they actually get worse. So we got to do something a little bit different along the way. And that's really the intention of this collective impact approach. So now, thank you. And just really want to say, I'm here, would love to connect more with folks throughout the session, and really recognizing that all this work is a partnership with our steering committee, with, especially sort of our anchor facility, the growing team at the Justice Research Center, and community collaborators. So fun to see some of them sort of accidentally here today. And I also just want to say thank you. This beautiful Gaussian distribution that every statistician loves is actually a thank you card that I received from the women inside Chittenden when I taught that statistics class back in 2019, which really sort of, I think, helped spark a lot of the relationship, of the research relationship between UVM and DOC. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I think this was a good presentation. I think it brought people along that could start understanding what PRIN was. Some of us have lived it, but this is new for many folks. And of course, it all started during COVID, so it was even more hidden. I think, what, is that your computer? Is that someone's computer? What is that noise?
I think they're vacuum. Yeah.
I should know that. I mean, we have vacuum at home, right? I think what's really important for PRIN to be successful, not only do you need the buy-in of the department from central office, you also need the buy-in from the superintendent of that facility, as well as the person who works with volunteers to come in. And I really want to do a shout out to Gio, who's on the screen. We call him Gio, it's Anthony. And I'm not going to go down your last name, Gio. But what has been really successful here is for the person who's coordinating volunteers to come into the facility is really, really important. And in this facility, Southern State, Gio was the face of that. And I don't know, Gio, if you want to share anything in terms of what you saw with PRIN and how it might have changed some dynamics within the facility. And also, I think the other thing that's really important is the coordination between those folks who are coming in and how that is starting to work or not work. So, Gio, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. If you're willing to share anything along those lines. And welcome for zooming in.
Thank you, Ms. Evans, and thank you to the committee for having me today. My name is Anthony Giordano. I also go by Gio, for those of you you've been hearing as well. Just a quick rundown to kind of get you guys up to speed with my efforts around the PRIN initiative itself. I got really involved with PRIN back in 2022 when I took over this position as the volunteer service coordinator here at Southern State. As you can tell, we were definitely in the mix of COVID and that pandemic, as well as we were starting to unroll some of those policies that we had affecting the facility about letting people into the facility with COVID. I really took the initiative to get a good understanding of what PRIN was and really look at the data that's coming out of the surveys that we're producing. And I don't know that I can really follow up on anything that Abby just highlighted. She does very well at recapping our efforts here at the facility and as UVM as well. So as she indicated before, one of the most things that stood out right away was not only the staffing crisis that the department was facing back then as well, but was the lack of services available to our incarcerated population with respects to reintegrating back into the community. So I took that initiative and I worked with Superintendent Michaela Merrill, who's been very supportive of my efforts here in the facility, as well as central office leadership as well, who has really bolstered me into kind of being able to kind of really think outside the box and open up some of our facilities to ensure that we're best representing the community's efforts with working with our incarcerated population. Not only was I tasked with kind of rebuilding our volunteer basis, with the normals, as you would expect, around religious services and some poetry groups and some other like-minded activities in the facility for the guys to engage throughout their day. We really took the effort, and I started to work with the department, and early on, and they went and established some contracts with some of our local community justice centers and our Turning Point active facility here in Springfield around recovery services and reentry services. So I started to work with those groups initially, getting them brought into the facility, getting them onboarded through the background process and stuff like that, finding them space and then finding them individuals to work with, connecting them with our case services, with the caseworkers and our living unit supervisors. And I really just started to acclimate those individuals to the facility so they become like a second wing of the facility to kind of offer those services to the incarcerated individuals. And some of those efforts have continued. You've seen me present in the communities, working with some of our local leadership, especially Chief Burnham from the Springfield Police Department and his Project Action. Recently, I've even onboarded that Chief Burnham into the facility to work with our incarcerated individuals. So it's not uncommon to see Chief Burnham up here working with our individuals around recovery and helping these guys with their addiction problems and just kind of breaking down those barriers between law enforcement and some of the individuals that are being housed with us here. And continuing on some of those efforts that we've really exploited with the justice centers, and that contract has come in. The Greater Falls Community Justice Center has been phenomenal, as well as the Springfield Justice Center, as well as interaction up there in Brattleboro, with really coming down and starting some support groups for these guys around our COSA programs, which is accountability and support for these guys, a more one-on-one target area for these guys to work with them, establishing them with support groups in the community as they begin to transition. And as you heard Abby mention before, we're working on some special projects where UVM has partnered with Interaction in Brattleboro around the quilting project and stuff like that to really get these guys engaged with these individuals that they're going to be reworking with when they reintegrate into the community. So we're trying to just break down some of those barriers so that they're becoming a familiar face and building that level of comfort for these individuals. So they're not just walking out blind in the community. But really what's been beneficial for me is just the support that we've had from those community partners and their willingness to come in the facility and put up with some of the restraints that come with working in a secure environment around the security procedures and stuff. And they've been very open-minded about it and very willing to understand not only that does the facility have needs to ensure its integrity, but we also identified the needs to work with these individuals so that they're getting the services they need. So I really think that Abby did a really good job at pointing out a lot of the efforts along the way and some of the hiccups that we've had. But we've made some great strides. The department is really focused on the print side for the staff individuals, where we've really bolstered our recruiting and retention efforts, as well as our counseling services. So as you go through some of that data you're going to see in the surveys, you'll see some rather alarming data that's connected to the health and wellness of the staff side. And I believe the department has established some really positive contracts with some counseling services to really address some of those staff needs as well as continuing to focus its efforts on recruiting and retention. Some of the things that you've heard over time with testimony, I'm sure, is they discussed the 223 schedule, where we've implemented some changes to the staffing patterns inside the facility to see if it would provide some additional resources and support that the facilities needed with those efforts. And like I said, I welcome any opportunity to take any questions that you may have for me here at the facility. I know that I've worked with Ms. Harrison on incorporating some volunteer services that she has expressed to me with some individuals coming to the facility to offer poetry groups, and that individual is still very present in the facility and still doing very well here. So again, I'm very open to working with anybody that's interested in coming in the facility. And I see that we have a hand up.
Well, thank you, Gio. That was very, very helpful and really in depth. So thank you. Jenny?
Well, thank you, Gio, and also Abby. This has been terrific. Your research is so important and critical for informing change. I really appreciate it. One thing you just said, Gio, that I think is of interest is that the community is welcoming of the institution, more welcoming. And so I have a couple questions about that. I mean, is it because of the work you're doing with Prin? And then to what extent, and this is more of a question perhaps for DOC, to what extent have you been engaged in, helping DOC work with communities? For example, we're looking for a new Chittenden County facility. Have you been engaged at all, anyone from Prin, with the DOC to talk with communities like Essex to help them understand what potential is there for collaboration, working together, and putting folks at ease?
Yes, ma'am. So again, the department itself has been very welcoming to work with the community agencies. I've taken the initiative to go out in the communities and work with a lot of efforts in the area with the project action and our situation tables and our crime and safety committee meetings that we have either manually, monthly or quarterly. And again, I've been able to socialize with individuals from the community to let them know that there is a path forward should they be interested in coming to work in the facility with our population. What's unique about Southern State is we have the Print Council, which is an incarcerated council, a group of inmates that incarcerated individuals that are available that work with the department and other agencies and other community partners to answer questions.
So, what do you do, freeze up?
Procedures around that. They've been able to engage the incarcerated population to ask questions and so forth and so forth. As far as my direct efforts with any kind of expansion for a new facility like that, I have not, I don't have a lot of exposure to that, no, although I am aware of some of the conversations and efforts. That has not really been something in my purview for me to really engage, if that makes sense.
No, but thank you for your work. It's really, it sounds terrific, just
Yes,
really
ma'am.
terrific. And Abby as well. Oh, terrific.
So we have another question. Topper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just heard a presentation that said one of the things that was found after surveying the people that are incarcerated, that prisoners were not prepared for release, and they only had enough staff to just kind of watch over the people that are incarcerated. And now we just heard a wonderful story about the good work that's being done and how it's affecting people. And I'm trying to just weigh which way is it? Do you have enough staff where you work, Gio, or I'm trying, you understand where I'm coming from? I heard
Yes.
one, then I heard another.
Yes, sir. I do believe. I think what I was trying to do was really just kind of capture some of the efforts that we've kind of done to address some of those issues. I do believe that we still have a lot of work to do and continue to work on and continue to identify some areas for improvement. But I will say the department itself has taken a great initiative over the last few years since we've been able to see some of the data coming out from Southern State Correctional Facility. And we do continue to expand those efforts. As you heard recently, we're looking to move to Rutland, where I've been able to go to Rutland myself to kind of engage the staff at that facility to kind of show them some of the efforts that we've done and kind of what works and what doesn't work. But I do believe that I don't know that I can accurately depict where the department is currently at with its staffing engagement. I will say that and just in the last few years, the department has made a significant amount of progress in increasing those staffing numbers. And I think that some of the misconceptions is that although there.
Oop, we froze up again. We froze out, Gio.
These guys need. We are working with a lot of our community agencies in the area to establish the rapport for these individuals with the incarcerated individuals as they transition back into the community. But one of the things that's unique about the Vermont Department of Corrections is that each facility is very unique and they kind of work with a very targeted population based on their needs and what the facilities are set up for. So a lot of the individuals that you'll see necessarily housed at Southern State Correctional Facility may not be the individuals that we're preparing to release into this community. So as we continue to work and identify some of those areas and continue to our efforts and to bring community resources into the facilities, I know that there's been an initiative to kind of incorporate those services at all facilities and kind of create some unison amongst those community agencies to understand that some of our population is very fluid and some other facilities are very focused on other layers of the department's needs, whether it be programming or acute mental health services or medical needs and stuff like that, which is where you kind of really see Springfield kind of standing out for those services because of our specialty units. Hope I answered your question and didn't make it worse for you, but.
Just so that I clearly understand. So some of the facilities, staffing wise and everything, are able to do what you've been able to do and others aren't. Is that?
Well, the efforts that with the volunteer services, you have one in each facility in the state, right? So there's a volunteer coordinator in every facility, and they do work with their local community partners to ensure that they're coming into the facilities to best serve our population. I would say that we've made a lot of progress, sir, but as you can tell, we still need to continue to work on some of those efforts to ensure that we've identified what resources are available in the community and that we're the department's, engaging those with the best effort.
Okay, good. Thanks very much for your efforts.
Yes, sir.
So Tucker, I know Haley wants to weigh in, so that might help answer some of this too. So Haley?
Yeah, for sure. I would just add, Reverend Fawn, that I think what we're seeing at Southern State right now is a perfect example of PRIN at its most successful. And so we see in the survey data that Abby had just presented that individuals who are incarcerated identified they were not being prepared for release. And that's why we've implemented some of the really exciting initiatives that we have. Most recently, we have started financial literacy courses at Southern State. Last year, we implemented a new debate program at Southern State. And so these are just some examples of the few programs that we've started directly as a result of some of the PRIN survey results that we've seen that can better help prepare individuals for release as they've identified through the surveys.
So then the goal right now with PRIN, but also with DOC, is seeing some of the success that occurred in Southern State. The collaboration between DOC and our community partners coming in has helped with maybe the culture and maybe the tone of that facility. And it's to really work with the other facilities individually to kind of model that, but it will look different in each facility and to have that flexibility for that.
Yes.
Exactly. So we have another question, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to Representative McFawn. I really appreciate your question. And the survey is actually really helpful here because if you look on page 30, I mean, you don't need to do that now, but there's a question that says there are a lot of times when there's nothing productive or meaningful for me to do, and that this is to the incarcerated folks. And the answer is that 74% of them agree with that. So that's not where we want to be, but there's a green box next to it, which means that it's that there is progress being made. So I think it's really helpful to see that what we the current situation and which way we're going. I think that's really helpful. And something that I want to talk about during the session is finding other ways to finance what's happening. Like there are many prisoners want to get skills that would help them with jobs. We need people to fulfill, to be in jobs. So I think there might be ways to look at other sources of funding to provide those that training. So thank you very much for all of your efforts.
Yes.
So Isaac wants to weigh in. I probably lost him. Now he came back.
I'm back.
back.
Well, it's very topical. I think just having presented to the opioid settlement advisory committee a few minutes ago around our work with Turning Point, doing recovery coaches into all of our correctional facilities and all of our probation and parole sites. The program that's going very, very well. We have thousands of individuals taking part in that program statewide. We will be coming to this body in the coming year as part of the opioid settlement recommendations to continue funding that program and help bridge us till the coaches are able to draw down Medicaid funds. We're also expanding Medicaid eligibility for our 1115 waiver, which will start on January 1st of next year, so just a couple weeks. And then the recovery coaches will become Medicaid eligible, I think in 2027 is what DSU has told me. So we will start to see ways that we can start to, I think, make some of this programming self-sustaining, but we will be coming to you for that. And then also, I think we could look at our work with CCV, Senator Harrison, where they are very interested in helping us to provide vocational training support, and that's funded through a congressionally directed spending package from Senator Sanders. So that's very exciting. We can use Pell Grant dollars to do that work, which will be self-sustaining as well. And then, I think it's really trying to kind of push forward a more dignified, humane approach and target policy implementations as identified through Abby and our partners at UVM to help policymakers look at our system, to shine a light into it, and try to figure out where we need to make those key investments.
And also, Wendy, there is collaboration right now going with Department of Corrections as well as our Department of Labor for recruitment assistance in terms of really working with the workforce development within Department of Labor with DOC, with the incarcerated population. So that linkage is starting to happen up in the Newport facility.
Great, thank you.
Little by little, it
Yeah,
kind of.
and there always has been some of that, but thank you.
Great, thank you. Anything else, Abby? Because I know it's lunchtime. When it gets lunchtime, legislators,
I think
shift gears.
I would say just thank you. And also just note, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I think what it is hopeful though. And I think I really appreciated Senator Harrison's point of, 74% of people saying they don't have enough things to do is bad.
It's a problem.
And that is why it's not sunshine and rainbows, yet we're starting to move the needle. And the key, I think, with Corinne is to keep these data and keep this light on these issues so that we can keep forward momentum. And when we start to have setbacks, we can pause, check in with each other and be like, what's happening? What's happening outside that's impacting us? So I think it really is about that sort of constant progress, recognizing that it's hard. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll see you during the legislative session. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to lunch. Come back at 1:00 and then we'll go from there.